Hey, how's it going? Chuck here, coming to you straight from Las Vegas. I've been here all week for a conference, and I've got about an hour and a half before I have to check out. So I thought, hey, this is a good time to use this cool space I have to record a video and give you some information that you're looking for. So what I'm going to talk about today is things that I wish I would have known before I started a business. I'm about 6-7 years into my entrepreneur journey. Before that, I was a carpenter, so I did a bunch of things actually as a carpenter, sushi chef. I did pretty much everything there is to do in a restaurant. But mostly, I spent most of my early career, first 10-15 years of my career as a carpenter and working my way up and eventually becoming a contractor. And most of you on this channel are contractors or aspiring contractors. And what I've learned over the years is that a lot of things in business are just the same across the board. Like you always have to have a way to take money. You always have to have a way to kind of, estimate or tell someone how much something's going to cost. You always have a marketing strategy of some sort, a sales strategy. You always have to figure out what to do with employees or how to manage them and manage contractors, all that kind of stuff. And so many of those things line up across the board. And what I aim to do in these videos is not to tell you what to think about these things or to show you exactly how to do these things. I'm a very conceptual person, so it's always my goal to kind of help you figure out how to think about these kinds of things. Because at the end of the day, if you're running a business or wanting to start your own business, most of the stuff you're just going to have to figure out yourself. That's just the way it goes. Your situation is going to be different than most of the people you come into contact with. So, when somebody tells you what they're doing, most of the time you can't just do exactly what they did and get the same results. In some cases you can, but most of the time, at least in my own experience, I've found that it's a lot better once I figured out that I just need to figure this stuff out for myself. And so that's the first thing right there, is if you are a business owner, you have to figure things out on your own. And the sooner you realize that, the better. And it is actually a lot better than the alternative. You might be thinking, oh man, I just want somebody to give me all the answers and tell me exactly what to do. But like I've already stressed, there's nobody that knows your exact situation. And so you're a lot better off figuring out how to improvise and how to figure things out on the fly. Because if you can figure that out, that's going to give you the confidence to know that you can handle anything that comes your way. And that brings me to the second thing that I wish I would have known before. And this is just something I learned after I did it. It kind of happened naturally, and now I can look back and see what it was. And in the beginning, when you start a business, you really don't know what you're doing. And so it can be very difficult to sell your services. And you're afraid to charge enough for your services because you're not fully confident in your ability to deliver the results that your customers want. And the way to get around this early on, at least the way that I did, because when I first started selling projects, they were the first projects that I was doing on my own or that I was running. And so I was nervous. I was like, shoot, I don't know if I can deliver what I'm promising here. Like, I think I can. But what got me over the hump is changing my focus to, can I do it, to I'm going to figure out how to do it no matter what. It was my mentality, the mentality that changed my sales game early on was, I'm not going to sleep until I figure this out. I take on a project for $5,000-$10,000. That's a lot of money. And maybe I won't be able to do it in the time that I'm thinking I can. But I knew that I was committed to doing it no matter how long it took me, no matter what it took. If I ended up having to spend my own money to make this happen, I was willing to do it. And once I made that mental shift, selling projects became a lot easier, because maybe it was something I hadn't done before, but I knew for certain that I wasn't going to give up until I got the results that my clients were after. So that mentality right there can get you over a lot of humps. And those two ideas right there, like, you have to figure shit out on your own, and you're committed to not giving up until you do it. Those two things can get you a really long ways in entrepreneurship. I watched a couple other videos of people, talking about what you should do if you're becoming a contractor or you're starting your own business. And they had some good points. They're talking about more of the technical things, like figure out a way to get paid, and what else did they say? Have some kind of marketing going on and promoting. And it's like, yes, definitely. You definitely need to have those things. But the first point that I made covers those things. Like, let's just look at the ability to get paid, for example. I'll never forget when I sold my first project and I wanted to take payment through credit card. I wanted my client to pay me right now. I didn't want to wait for a check or anything like that. And so I literally Googled like how to take payments by credit card, and I found this company called Stripe, and I was like, okay, so I created a Stripe account, and I just went through the motions, and literally like 15 minutes later, I had a method of taking a payment, and I was able to send the invoice to this client. Soon after that, they paid. So that was something that I just was able to figure out on the fly, and that's pretty much what business is like, especially in the beginning, is it's just one improvisation on the fly solution after another, and you just have to be prepared for that. The third thing I want to talk about is certainty. Uncertainty is just a fact of life, but it's one of those things that humans are really uncomfortable with. And this is one of the things that holds most people back from quitting their job and starting their own business, is the uncertainty. They don't know if they're going to be successful or not. They don't know if they can do it, things like that. And at the same time, a lot of people think of their job as a certain thing. It's like, oh, well, I know I'm going to get this paycheck every 2 weeks, and I can rely on that. It's stable. And I used to think that too. Like, it's a lot easier mentally when you can just rely on somebody else to worry about all the stuff, and you're just going to get your paycheck every 2 weeks. But here's the reality of it, and you realize this once you're a business owner and you're running things and you're hiring other people, is these people that work for me now, they feel like their pay is super stable. They have a lot of certainty in their life. They just don't worry about this stuff. But just because they don't worry about this stuff doesn't mean it isn't there. I worry about their paychecks now. And I know that some disaster, something major could happen. I could get in a car accident and die tomorrow, and my business is going to fade away because I'm still an integral part of my business. And so if that happens, my employees' jobs are gone. Their paychecks are gone. They're going to have to find something else. And there's just millions of circumstances that can lead to someone losing their job. My point is that jobs really aren't any more certain than running your own business. In fact, at this point in my career, I feel like running my own business is a lot more stable and certain than if I were to get a job somewhere. And that's because I have a lot of experience figuring stuff out and making stuff happen for myself. And so I'm confident in my ability to figure things out, that when I look at the uncertainty in the future, I'm more comfortable with it. There's no less uncertainty in the future. I'm just more comfortable with it because I know no matter what comes my way, as long as I have my health and my freedom, I'll be able to figure it out. I'll be able to figure out how to make enough money to get by. I'll be able to figure out if this business for some reason went under, I'd be able to create another one. And that's a lot more freedom from uncertainty than I think having a job. When you have a job, you are relying on the people above you to keep it together, to keep your paycheck possible. And I think that's an issue that a lot of us have with working for other people, is as an employee for somebody, you get to see all the mistakes and the shortcomings of the people above you. And a lot of a lot of carpenters and tradespeople, I've heard it a million times now. They're like, my boss sucks. They're never on the job. Like, I can do this way better than they can, so I'm going to work for myself. And that may be true, but most of the time those people aren't seeing this huge chunk of stuff that their boss does, that their boss worries about, that their boss has to keep under control in order to keep the whole operation working. And so many times I've seen it now, these folks will go out on their own, they'll get their contractor's license, insurance, they'll start running their own business, and now all of a sudden they're seeing all this other stuff. Now they have to go look at projects and do bids on the nights and weekends. And now they got to do their bookkeeping all the time, because there's shitloads of bookkeeping that goes along with construction, right? They have to do payroll if they have employees. They have to, there's just so many things that you don't see when you're just a carpenter on the job installing trim, thinking, oh man, boss is never here, he never does shit, blah, blah, blah. There's tons of stuff that goes along with business. And another thing to keep in mind is if you have this kind of mindset and you recognize that, think about it for a minute. Like, you want to be your own boss, you want to start your own business. Why? What's the end goal here? I know for me, the end goal is to work less and to make more. My goal isn't to spend all my time working for the rest of my life. My goal is to get to a place where I can control those variables. If I want to work less or more, I can control that variable. If I want to make more, I have some control over that variable. And so that's what being a business owner does, is it gives you control over the variables, but at the same time, now you're responsible for all of those variables. And so, that's just something that it takes time to adjust to. The fourth thing I'm going to talk about is accounting, numbers. Are you a numbers person? I don't know if I am or not. I mean, I can be pretty good with numbers, but I'm not one of those people that just obsesses over it or particularly enjoys keeping track of and crunching all the numbers all the time. But when it comes to business, it's an integral part. And it took me many years to figure this out, and I think that's pretty common. But what I eventually figured out is that I have to track closely all the numbers, because when you see all the numbers clearly, and I'm talking about, how much time and money and energy you're spending going and getting jobs, bidding jobs, making sure they get completed, how much money you have going out on materials, on employees, on contractors, how much money you have coming in, when it's coming in, all the taxes that are involved in that. Like, you got to keep track of all this stuff closely. If you just let it all build up and then wait until the end of the year to figure all this stuff out, first of all, it's a nightmare, because it just takes so much time and energy, and you never end up doing as good of a job as if you just kept up with it. But sometimes you figure out, holy cow, I didn't even make any money, right? There's companies out there that will operate for a whole year and realize that they lost money for the year. I can't imagine doing that. And the way that I got around it earlier in my career is I'm pretty good at estimating all this stuff, and I just made sure that I was charging a high enough price for jobs that I was certain I was making some kind of profit. And that works for a while, but eventually, you can run your business for your entire life and never figure this out. I know a friend of mine named Jeff Williams. He's a groundwater contractor, well driller, and he's nearing retirement. And he just spent a year or two going through community college accounting classes and really figuring out how to track all the numbers in his business and how to understand what they mean. And now he's able to look at all the different parts of his business and see which parts are profitable and which parts aren't. He knows exactly how much he needs to charge for a project to make the profit that he wants off of it, based off of the actual numbers that he has going back decades. And so, step one for new guys is start with just tracking all your stuff. Find a way to track every number you can. Get comfortable with spreadsheets. If you're not someone who's ever going to use spreadsheets, then you got to hire somebody that's going to do this stuff for you, like an accountant, a bookkeeper, whatever. But most people starting out, they don't have budgets to hire people to do this stuff, so you just got to figure out how to do this stuff yourself. Google Sheets, you can use it for free. Start learning how to do it. Just start tracking stuff, and over the years you'll get better at tracking, and then later on when you get better at understanding what the numbers mean, you'll have all of this data built up that you can actually base your decisions off of. And I don't know, this kind of seems high level, maybe a little too high level for someone starting out, but I think it's important to start thinking about this stuff early. And to, if you have a job right now and you're thinking about starting your own business, you got to be aware of this stuff. Like, this is stuff that you've got to do if you want to be successful. And so understanding what you're getting yourself into is part of the point of this video. But tracking things is super important. I run a marketing company, and tracking is one of the most important things about marketing, because as a business, you spend a certain amount on marketing every week, every month, every year. You want to be able to look back at last year and say, okay, I spent this much money on marketing, and I got this many jobs from it, and from those jobs, I made this much profit. And you want to compare that initial cost to that profit and see what you got there. Because, at a minimum, you want to break even. You definitely don't want to be losing any money. At a minimum, you want to break even. Once you know you're breaking even, and then you want to profit, and eventually you want to be working that initial investment number down and that profit number up. And so just tracking that stuff super closely is integral. You have to do it. And that leads me into another idea that I think is very important. And that idea is how marketing works in the first place. And I'm going to use one form of marketing, which is advertising. Advertising is where you spend money to be, you're on a billboard, you're in the yellow pages, you're on Google Ads, used to be called Google AdWords. When you pay for advertising, you're literally paying for exposure, and that exposure will bring you a certain amount of job opportunities. And what you do is you take that money that you spent in total and you divide it by the number of job opportunities you get, and you figure out how much you're paying for each job opportunity. And then further down the value chain, you figure out how much you're making on average per job. If you do 50 jobs in a year, add up all the profit you made, divide it by 50, that's your average per project. And so eventually you want to know all these numbers and be able to see that stuff. But one of the biggest pitfalls I see with business owners, some new, some that have been in business for decades, is they don't understand the proportions necessary to invest in advertising and what you're going to get out of it. And it's a big part of that is that they don't track their numbers closely, so they just don't understand. And here's an example. Like, I just talked to a guy the other day. He's interested in hiring us to build a website and get him established with some foundational type marketing. And a website with our company starts at around $5,000, just under $5,000. And he was convinced that in order for that investment to be worth it, and for some context, he's a remodeling contractor. So he's he's doing projects that are profiting probably anywhere from $2,000 to $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. And so let's just say he averages $8,000 profit per job. So let's just look at those numbers. Invest $5,000 in this website. And this website, in realistic average terms, should bring in, anywhere from 3 to 20 calls. So let's just call it 8 calls a month. And these are really highly qualified leads, highly qualified calls. And so, at least 2 of those are going to become projects. And his average profit was $8,000. Let's just call his average profit $5,000. Let's be even more conservative, make it a little simpler. So invest $5,000 in a website, get 2 projects a month that each pay $5,000. Eventually you're averaging about $10,000 profit a month. That's a pretty good investment. really good investment. If I could put $5,000 into something and then 6 months later be making an extra $10,000 every month, it's $120,000 a year. That's an amazing investment. Those are good numbers. If that's the situation, you can make that decision. You can just weigh all your options. You've got a few options for marketing. You run the numbers on each one. You make your decision. This guy was convinced that it would not be worth it unless he got 30 to 50 calls every month. And that's just, it's completely unreasonable. First of all, for a one-man show contractor, you don't even have time to take 50 calls a month. You get 20 work days in a week or in a month. 50 calls, what is that? That's like 2.5 calls every day. And if you're spending 30 minutes, an hour plus a day that you're just on the phone with new leads, it doesn't count estimating, going to meet with them, doing any of the work. So it's just completely unreasonable. And, you know, a much, much, much larger company needs that volume. And so that's just one example of, you just don't really understand the numbers and how that stuff works. Another quick example is just people just have really unreasonable expectations. They go to invest in advertising or like Home Advisor or anything, and they're like, okay, I'm going to put $300 in. And they don't really ever crunch the numbers and figure out how much they need to make it profitable. They're just thinking, oh God, $300 is a lot of money to me. That's a huge expense. And they're stuck on that. And so then at the end of the month, maybe they made $1,500 from that investment, but they're thinking, oh, this wasn't worth it, you know? And that isn't what makes it not worth it. You know, you have to see the big picture. You have to crunch all the numbers. But if it was possible to just spend $300 and make 10 grand out the other side, then everybody would just do that. You know what I mean? If I could spend $300 on leads from Home Advisor and instantly make 10 grand every month, I'd just go do that. And maybe that is possible once in a while. Maybe it used to be more possible. But what happens in that situation is economics. You've got, if that's the situation and it's easy and it's that predictable, there's going to be more and more people doing that. And the more people that do that, the less efficient it's going to be. The price is going to go up. Soon you'll have to spend $500 to get $10,000 out the other side. Soon you'll have to pay $1,000 to get $10,000 out the other side. Soon you'll have to pay $5,000 to get out the other side. You're still making 200% ROI, but it's becoming less available or less accessible to those with a smaller budget. So, you know, when you're starting out in business, you don't have all these numbers, you don't have this experience. I can explain this stuff to you, but I know from personal experience that when it comes to investing in marketing, it's something you have to learn in your bones. You have to learn from experience. I run a marketing company, and it still took me like 4 years to really grasp this. I was always afraid of spending money on ads. You know, like $500 was a lot for me to spend. And it wasn't until last year that I started tracking this stuff super closely for myself and spending thousands of dollars a month on advertising and being able to see, like, okay, if I spend $3,000, I'm going to make $8,000 out the other side, you know? And that's, you know, it's not a get rich quick scheme, but it's pushing my business forward and it's raising our revenue and it's making us grow. And so that's just something that you have to contend with. Like, you might have to spend $3,000 to make $10,000 or $20,000. And you can look up the industry averages. You can go to Google and type in what's the average percentage of revenue spent on marketing. And the newer the business, the higher that is. Because over time, you'll get, if you do a good job, you'll get referrals, you'll have repeat customers, you'll find methods of marketing that are more efficient, like websites and Google Maps and things like that. And all of those things just take time to build up and to work. So in the beginning, you might have to spend a lot more than you think to get those jobs. And it makes it a very risky game. It makes it so you have to pay attention to all of these numbers very, very closely, because you need to make sure that you're profitable. If you're spending $3,000 a month and you're not profitable, you're not going to be able to do that for very long before you go out of business. This video is getting kind of long, so I'm gonna talk about one more thing. And at this conference that I was just at, this one was for groundwater contractors, and this industry is really struggling with two things. They're struggling with finding and keeping good workers, and they're struggling with raising their prices. And so the last thing I want to talk about is pricing. Pricing is extremely important, and it goes back to the accounting and tracking your numbers and knowing all of your numbers. Because when you're pricing projects, the best way to price projects is based off of the data from your own projects. You know, if you go do 100 bathroom remodels and track closely the numbers from all 100 of those, you should be able to walk into a bathroom, you know, walk into someone's house to look at a bathroom project and know right off the top of your head pretty much how much this is going to cost, because you have all this data to go off of. What I see most contractors doing is they kind of treat each job like a new one. They estimate based off of their intuition, and estimating based off your intuition is similar because you have all the experience, but it's not as good as basing it off the actual data, the actual numbers. And so, you know, there's kind of two ways to estimate projects. One of them is to go through and look at each part of the project. For a remodel, it's like demo, framing, electrical and plumbing, drywall, insulation. You know, you kind of have an idea of like, okay, this is going to take this long, it's going to require this much materials, and you're kind of just like estimating that stuff. But if you could go back and look at a collection of 100 projects and figure out how much time insulation takes to install based on square footage of the 100 projects you've already done, estimating becomes a matter of just plugging in the numbers instead of trying to guesstimate. And it becomes just a lot easier, and it becomes more objective. When you can look at an itemized estimate and say with certainty, like, this is pretty much how much it's going to cost, and this is how much profit I want to make, whether you want to make a 33% gross margin or a 50% gross margin, you plug all those numbers in, and that's how much it costs. If you charge less than that, it's coming out of your profit, and it will help you have conviction behind the prices you're charging, because that's one of the biggest things is, you know, contractors, they feel like it's a big number, so they look for ways to knock it down, and that money ends up coming out of their pockets. Look, I've been watching my dad do this for years, and I've done the same exact thing. It's like, oh man, 25,000, that's a lot. Maybe I can find ways to lower it. But that's the wrong mentality. You don't want to be using your subjective feelings when it comes to estimating for your business. You want to break down all the costs, plug in your markup, and figure out what your margin's going to be, and that's the price. And another thing about pricing, and this is something that groundwater contractors struggle with big time because they've been in business for so long. Some of these companies have been around for over 100 years, some well over 100 years. These are multi-generation companies. These companies have had the same customers for their customers' entire lives. You know, these families have been customers to this company since they were kids, since before they were born. You know, they go way back. And so as the economy changes, these companies need to raise their prices in order to stay in business. But these same customers on fixed incomes can't afford to pay higher prices. And it's really hard, you know, I know this from experience, it's really hard to have a customer come back to you for a similar project that they did 10 years ago and tell them they're going to have to pay twice as much for it. It's just hard to do that. And you don't want to make somebody pay twice as much for basically the same kind of project that you did for them 10 years ago. It's just a really difficult thing to do. And one of the cool things about being the business owner, about being in charge of this stuff, is you have the flexibility to do that stuff. But what gives you the flexibility to offer somebody a really good deal is, again, knowing your numbers, inside, outside, backwards, and forwards. If you can run all the numbers and know exactly how much this project's going to cost you, then you have the option of running it unprofitably, running it at cost. Give them a good deal. You even have the option of running it at a loss if you want to give somebody a really good deal. But knowing that will allow you to make up for that somewhere else. And don't ever feel bad about what you're charging people, unless you're like outright gouging people. That's obviously wrong. You shouldn't price gouge, but don't ever feel bad about making a profit. As a business owner, it's your duty to make sure that your company can turn a profit and sustain itself moving forward. Because if you're doing a good service for people, the only way for you to continue to be able to do that is to be profitable and sustainable. If you go out of business, you're not helping anybody. And you owe it to yourself, you owe it to your employees. It's best for everyone if you can profit. And there's always going to be people that can't afford your services. And so it's just up to you to decide whether or not you're going to do those projects anyways. It's always a lot easier to turn down someone you don't know because they can't afford it than it is to turn down someone you do know. So anyways, I hope that this stuff was helpful for you. If you have any questions or comments or would like to add to the discussion, please put them in the comment section. There's a link to my website in the description if you want to reach out to me and talk to me in person. I'd love to talk to you on the phone. We could do a Zoom call. I want to learn about you, what you're doing, and I'm happy to give, I'm happy to give anybody 30 minutes to help them in any way I can. So feel free to reach out to me. If you found this video valuable, hit that like button. It really helps my channel grow. And also, if you like this kind of stuff and you want to be alerted when I make more videos like this, hit the subscribe button. So thank you very much for watching. Hopefully, I'll see you on the next one.